Do you think that Margaret Ferrier should resign as an MP?
I think she should resign as an MP. I think she has lost the trust of her constituents, and I think in terms of the way that we have to deal with this global pandemic, we need to send out the message that people must comply with the rules, and for anybody to break the rules is putting people at risk. For a Member of Parliament to break rules in such a negligent and haphazard way, putting the lives and the health of workers at risk, and for people who work on trains and in Parliament, is really unforgivable, and we need to send out a very strong message that this will not be tolerated.
So if you get your way and she does resign, there'll of course be a by-election. What would Labour's position be on a second independence referendum in that by-election?
Well, our position is absolutely clear. The Scottish Executive Committee, which is the ruling committee of the Scottish Labour Party, passed and reaffirmed its position back in May, and that position is to go into the election next year against independence, as we always have been, and against the second independence referendum, and come out of that election with exactly the same position.
But if the SNP win the majority at next year's Scottish Parliament elections, would they have a mandate for another referendum?
Well, I think these hypothetical questions are something that we should be putting on the back burner during this global pandemic. Your first question was on whether or not an SNP MP would be spreading the virus across the United Kingdom by travelling to and from Parliament. And that's what the Scottish people want us to concentrate at the moment. They want us to go into that election knowing we have a post-COVID recovery plan. They want us to come out of that election trying to sort the economy, sort people's jobs and protect their livelihoods. And to consistently have these hypothetical questions. Keir Starmer has gone into the leadership of the Labour Party with his new leadership and said quite clearly that he wants to be leader of the whole of the United Kingdom in 2024. He wants to make sure that Scotland isn't independent, and he doesn't want a second independence referendum. So those are pretty clear positions, and I think all these hypotheticals we need to move on. It is not the priorities of the Scottish people. And if I could just very quickly say that in the recent poll, in the recent last two polls actually, a second independence referendum just made it into the top 10 when you added those who desperately wanted one to those who desperately didn't want one. So it's not the priorities of the Scottish people, and we have to concentrate on those, and that's what we're doing in the run-up to the election, and that's what we'll continue to do after the election.
You know, you can kind of criticise us for not asking enough about coronavirus, for asking about Scottish independence, for asking hypothetical questions, but I feel like the problem is that if journalists feel that they're not quite clear what Labour's position is in response to this question, then they're just going to keep asking the question again. Keir Starmer back in January said the SNP will have a mandate for another referendum if they win next year. He added, this is a question for Scotland and the people of Scotland. If there's a majority, it has to be looked at in Westminster. It feels as if you're not being straight. What would the position be?
Well, this isn't a fight for the Labour Party to have. We won't be in power at Westminster come May 2021 unless there is some kind of general election before then, and I doubt that will
happen. So you don't have a view at all on something that is such an important issue?
And therefore, Keir Starmer has been pretty clear. He wants to take forward a constitutional convention that looks at a federalist state across the United Kingdom. He wants to look at how the House of Lords operates. He wants a new constitutional settlement going into the 2024 general election. That's what will be in the Labour Party manifesto. The Labour Party couldn't be clearer. In fact, the reason that we're in some of the difficulties in terms of electoral difficulties in Scotland is because we are clear on this principal position. We're against independence and against a second independence referendum. I really do think that this is couldn't be clearer. And if you look at Douglas Ross in terms of the new Scottish Conservative leader, he said quite clearly that many in his own party don't believe in the union. And really, the biggest threat to the United Kingdom at the moment, even more than any nationalist, in fact, is the Conservative and Unionist Party, with the way they're dealing with Brexit, the way they're dealing with COVID, and the way that the Scottish people see this current Prime Minister.
The COVID cases, of course, top of the political agenda for everyone at the minute. We saw, of course, those record number of cases posted yesterday because of a technical error. How concerned are you about the current situation?
Well, I think the current situation with COVID, I think the government have messed it up. They've wasted the summer. It's quite clear that test and trace isn't working properly. The testing system is collapsing. And indeed, it may have been a technical error, but it's just another error layered on top of all the other problems with test and trace. And I think if you look at what Keir Starmer has said today, in terms of the 5-point plan to try and get the country back on an even keel, I think that's very clear in terms of what needs to be done. We've got lots of areas in local lockdown. We've got confused messaging. We've got a Prime Minister that doesn't know what the messaging is. We've got areas like Bury and Bolton and Burnley in lockdown, when in actual fact they have lower infection rates and R rates than perhaps Uxbridge, where the Prime Minister's constituency is. And I think somebody said yesterday, an academic said, you could drive 40 miles across the northwest of England and go through 4 different areas with 4 different COVID restrictions. So we really need the government to start showing us what their criteria is for putting areas into local lockdown, what their criteria is for bringing areas out of local lockdown, fixing test and trace. And really, if everyone's to download the COVID apps in both Scotland and those apps you should be able to pop in your postcode, because the app tells you where you are and give you a list of the local restrictions. It seems strange that newspapers and broadcasting outlets can do this on their websites, but the government can't do it on their own app. So let's learn from some of the countries, as we've already been said, like Germany, who's publishing their criteria for local people to see, and let's try and get the country out of this as quickly as possible with a sensible government, with a communication strategy that doesn't seem completely haphazard.
Okay.
The Minister that's out.
Just finally, a book called Left Out, released last month, revealed that you almost left the Labour Party last year. There was actually a picture of you rehearsing your speech at a launch event of the independent group. Of course, 7 Labour MPs quit the party to form the group. Apparently you pulled out at the last minute. None of them are in Parliament. You're in the shadow cabinet. Did you dodge a bit of a bullet there?
Well, I think I made the correct decision to stay, and I think over that period of time, many people in the Labour Party, whether it be the PLP or ordinary members, looked very seriously at whether or not the Labour Party still held the values that they held. That wasn't.
Why did you change your mind?
That wasn't a rehearsed speech. Actually, it was just we were given bits of paper to see what it would look like and what we would do. I pulled out quite before the Change UK people did leave, and I did change my mind because of a number of reasons. The Labour Party across the United Kingdom is still the only party that speaks for the whole of the United Kingdom, and is the only party that can deliver the social change and the social justice that I came into the Labour Party to do. I want to fight against that inequality and against poverty, and the Labour Party can do that. I'm glad I stayed. We're now under new leadership and new management. Keir Starmer's doing incredibly well. I think the public are starting to respond to that. I'm disappointed some people in the end did leave, and history will show that they did it for the right reasons. And many people, including in the Conservative Party, of course, and in other parties, Liberal Democrats and others, really examined whether or not they would stay in their parties over that tumultuous period. I made the decision to stay, and I'm very glad that I did.